Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Dennis and I'm a pilot. This will be about airplanes because that's really my passion. And the idea was to walk through a couple of different aircrafts, to walk through the aircraft itself and the systems and of course the avionics and how it all works. This is not meant to be a type rating, it's meant to be for information only. So if you, as me, love airplanes, you can watch it and you can see how the different airplanes are made and how you fly them and how you utilize and how you use the avionics. So I'm rated on two airplanes right now. One is a Beechcraft Premier 1A and I fly that for a friend when I'm home in Europe. And the other one is a Hondajet. So we're gonna start with the Hondajet. It's really a nice airplane. Maximum takeoff mass of 10,700 pounds. Well, actually the legacy version has 10,600 pounds, but can be upgraded to the APMG version. And then the Elite, which is the newest model, is also 10,700 pounds of maximum takeoff mass. It seats 7 people, 2 up front and 5 in the cabin. And we're gonna start today by walking through the cockpit of the Hondajet because it's really interesting. It's one of the very few new clean sheet design aircrafts out there in the very light category of personal jets or business jets, if you want. I think it's made in around Honda Aircraft Company in Greensboro made around 200 pieces already, so they're really rolling off the production band over there all the time. And we're gonna start by walking through the cockpit. This is a poster I got when I was at Flight Safety back in October last year for the training. I'm gonna walk through it on the computer because it's really hard to show here on a camera. So with that in mind, let's sit down and walk through the cockpit initially, and then we can take the aircraft systems afterwards. So this is the overview of the cockpit of a Hondajet. So the model number, as I mentioned before, is HA420. I believe it's Honda aircraft, and then 420 is for the maximum cruising speed of 420 knots performed in flight level 310. The cockpit is very nicely set up. It's very intuitive to use as a pilot, and I really enjoy the avionics in this airplane. As you can see, it has these 3 big screens, 2 PFDs, one in pilot side, one in co-pilot side, and the big MFD in the middle. It's all controlled by the CDUs under, which is touchscreen, and that's not completely true because it's actually some kind of infrared system that detects where your finger is at, so you can actually use this one even with gloves. So in cold working conditions, and if you're wearing gloves until the airplane is heated up, it still works. So it's not a traditional touchscreen display. It's really done intelligently, you can say. So if we start with how the layout is, it's all made and divided into different systems. That's nothing new for an airplane, but the way Honda constructed this is that almost everything is automatic. You don't need to do very much as a pilot. There's no overhead switch panel. The only thing that's in the overhead panel is map reading lights and air vents, and then the speed limitations. So if you forgot them, you can just look up there what the maximum flap speed is, etc., etc. So everything is controlled through the CDUs. Even the standby instrument is electronic on this airplane, and it's really nice. So the logic behind how the cockpit is built is very different from other aircrafts. It doesn't have any toggle switches as such. It has push switches. The logic behind it is that when it's a norm, it means that it works as it should, and it's automatically. You can override it and then it turns yellow on the light bulb. So yellow is not good and white norm light is good. That's primarily how it's built up. So everything is controlled by the aircraft itself and by the computers itself. So as long as you put in the right data into the computers, it's going to fly just perfectly and everything works automatically. You don't have to consider lightning, you don't have to consider pressurization, you don't have to consider anything unless something breaks down. And that's the time you start to use the toggle switches. We'll just start from left to right and go through all the different areas in the cockpit so you can see what's available. We'll zoom in here, over here, and this is first the oxygen and pressurization panel. There's an air vent above, and yeah, that's where the air conditioning comes out, and also the air conditioning comes out from the overhead vents, and that's the only place where you get cooled air out in the cockpit. Actually, you also get cooled air out under the pedestal where the power levels are. We'll come back to that later. But that's the 5 outlets you have from cold air when operating in hot environment. I'm operating this airplane in the Philippines, so it's pretty warm here. The air conditioning is really needed. But the pre-cooled bleed air comes out in the windscreens to kind of heat them up, along with the electronic heating of the windscreens as well. But there's no cold air coming out there. In the cabin, it's also only the overhead vents that's connected to the air conditioning system, so you're dependent on opening all the vents to get out cold air in the cabin. So make sure to open those at all times. There's no reason to actually close those vents unless, of course, you're freezing. The oxygen panel has very limited operations. So there's oxymask audio, and that's normally in norm, which is good. And you can push that button and then put it into emergency, and that will activate the microphone in the oxygen mask. So if you do need to wear the oxygen mask, you would push that button to activate the microphone so you can also communicate with ATC in the hopefully very unlikely event of a cabin fire or cabin depressurization. The oxygen supply system is a push handle. It's mechanically connected into the oxygen system, so it opens and closes a valve that opens and closes for the oxygen flow. So when the aircraft is not used, it's pulled, and then you push it to open for the oxygen supply. So you won't be sitting there and fighting with a lever that's pulled out, as you do, for instance, in the Premiere. You pull it to turn it on. I like the design where you actually push it to turn it on, so you won't be fighting with that handle. The cabin is for the oxygen system in the cabin. You can turn it off if you were in the unlikely situation that you would need to preserve oxygen for the flight crew. Then you can turn off the oxygen flow here for the cabin. Of course, that's not a preference, but say if you fly with, I don't know, freight or anything, you can turn it off or force it off. You can also force drop the masks. They will drop automatically if the cabin pressure drops below a certain level. If it's around 12 to 13,000 feet cabin altitude, the mask will drop automatically. But that's not necessarily a good thing, because if you have no passengers there, you would not need it, or if would not need oxygen flow to the mask, and that's why you can turn it off. There's also the option for dropping the mask manually, and that would be in the event of fire. So if there's smoke in the cabin and you need to supply the passengers with fresh oxygen, that would be how you do it. So you drop the masks. Then the pressurization control panel, very limited. So basically it has only 2 buttons. One is control mode, which is normally then the aircraft controls everything by itself. You don't need to think about anything. All you need to consider is to put in your landing field elevation, which you do when you create your flight plan in the system, in the avionics. It pulls out the landing field elevation by itself. so nothing much to do. But you can hold the cabin altitude if you would need that. So if there's an error in the pressurization system, in the automatic pressurization system, you are able to hold the current cabin altitude by pushing that button. The other one, the dump one, is protected behind a cover, and that's because you need to think twice if you want to really dump the cabin. There's not that many situations where you would like or prefer to dump the cabin. The only one I can really think of is in the event of a cabin fire again. You might want to consider dropping the cabin pressure to clear out the smoke in the cockpit and the cabin. Smoke in airplanes are in general not really good things, so you could use that switch to clear out the smoke in the cabin. The next panel, or you can say that's the PFD screen here. It's a standard EFIS panel, and it has the standard instruments in there, the standard 6-pack of instrument just presented electronically. On the left side, you can see a window here. What's up in the demo here is a TORS system, so you can actually pull up anything in there from Garmin Jeppesen charts or Garmin's flight charts, Jeppesen charts, checklist, weather radar, flight plan, routing, whatever you want, you can pull up on that window, but you cannot minimize it. So you always have a window there. So that gives, I would have preferred that you could actually minimize that window somehow and use the whole PFD as a PFD, but that's unfortunately not a possibility here. The avionics in the aircraft is Garmin's G3000 suite, and I believe it was developed together with Honda Aircraft Company, so it's really specialized for this particular aircraft. If you see on the PFD panel, you can see the autopilot panel up here, where my mouse is right now. So that is the modes that the autopilot is operating on. You can see right now it's activated in heading mode, and the localizer is armed, so meaning that they're flying into some kind of localizer somewhere. You can also see the localizer needle down here. So the avionics will, or the autopilot will automatically flick from heading to localizer mode as soon as you are approaching the localizer. You can see the autopilot is engaged and the yaw damper is engaged, and that it's coupled to the left-hand PFD. So if you were to fly with a co-pilot, you could let him fly the aircraft as well, and then you would need to change the selector, the coupling selector, to the co-pilot side, and then the arrow would of course be pointing right, not left. So we can also see that altitude mode is engaged in the autopilot, and that it's standing by for glide slope. So this would maybe be an ILS somewhere in San Francisco, I think it is. So, but it's not yet tuned into the glide slope, but it's in standby up here. So when it captures the glide slope, you can actually see the glide here. Then it will capture and follow the glide down to minimums. You can see that the altitude pre-selector up here is 3,100 feet and currently flying at 3,080 feet. I don't know why they made it like that. On the left side over here, you can see that the airspeed pre-selector is set to 120 knots. The aircraft can somehow follow a preset airspeed on climb or descent, and it can even do it on cruise. That is pretty handy. The aircraft do not have auto throttle, but it is possible to use the FADEX system to just regulate the engine power a little bit. So you can preset 160 knots for circling approach, or if you're flying low altitude, you can pre-select the speed, and it's able to capture and hold that speed, even though it does not have auto throttle. So down here we can see the VAC speed and the ref speed that's used for landing. The ref speed in this particular aircraft is 1.23 times stall, so it's a little bit closer margin to stall than most other certified airplanes. But it's actually the same with the Premier. Both the Premier and this Honda Jet is a very, very clean design, and it's it really wants to fly, so you really need to keep your speeds VAC and slowing to ref speed below 1,000 feet. It's, according to my experience, at least the best. So down here we have the CAS message view. So right now the system is telling us that we did not set any landing field elevation. You can also see over here on the MFD that the landing field elevation is not set. The landing field elevation is really needed for the pressurization system to calculate the cabin descent rate to make sure that you will not have ears popping when you're landing. So you can put it in manually, but if you put in a proper flight plan and with a worldwide database, as we use in our airplane, then it will give you no troubles. You can just key in whatever airport in the whole wide world, and it has all the data on that airport there. So down here we have the tuning information, and we can see that now one is soon tuned in and identified as ISFO. And if we pull up the plate for San Francisco, it's actually already pulled up over here. Then we would see that actually that is the ident of the ILS for San Francisco. We can also see that the DME distance. We cannot see what DME is actually tuned. I believe it's tuned together with the ILS in this case, because if it was tuned to another frequency, it should be out here. Then we can see the temperature gauges. There's a timer here, a manual timer that you can enable. It counts up or down, and then you can see the timer here. You can also see the UTC time here, and we can see the saturated air temperature, and we can see that it's actually ISA conditions right now, so it's ISA +0. Down here we have the soft keys for the PFD, and right now we can activate traffic, and that's because we've got the TOS system, traffic awareness system, pulled up here on the left side. So we can do some traffic settings on the map by pushing this soft key here. PFD settings has a menu where you can set up if you want to use hectopascals or you want to use inches of mercury for your pressurization, but for your QNH settings. So you can also change from feet to meters and stuff like that in there. For the active nav source, you can set using this soft key here. You can scroll in between the nav sources in there, so you can tune in on both navigational sources, or you can put in an ADF or whatever bearing point that you want. Use this button here. And the sensors is for changing the AHARS. So if you have an AHARS failure, the attitude heading reference system, then you can toggle in between the two AHARS sensors in here. There is a third sensor in this aircraft, and that's the standby sensor. You are not able to select it automatically, but if both AHARS systems fails, the system will automatically switch to the standby sensors and give you a CAS message that you are running on a single sensor. So that's also very nice. So then we have the electrical panel down here. It's very small. It's only consisting from 5 buttons. We will come into the electrical systems later on, so this is just to give the cockpit overview. First we have the master switches, and that's battery on and off. Of course, the light in the switch will not be lighting off if when you turn it off, it can only be on this particular switch, but there is still a light in the off button, but in practicality it's never used unless when you're testing the light bulbs in the aircraft. And then you have the generators. The generators come online automatically. It's a starter generator, so after you start up the aircraft and it fires a sequence, then it will automatically change from a starter into a generator. And it's running in normally, and that means it's just automatic. So, but if you for some reason would choose to take a generator offline, I don't know what situation that could be, but if you would like to take a generator offline, this is the switches you use to do that. Then we have 2 protected or covered buttons down here again, and it's open or off. So you can normally these lights will not be showing off at all because it's just automatically again. So the bus tie is in between the left and the right bus. In most other airplanes I know of, the bus tie would be closed in normal operation, but in a Honda it's open under normal operation. So you have two completely independent bus systems in this aircraft, and that's the left and right main bus. But if you, for some reason, would like to connect those two buses, this is where you can do it. So, no, excuse me. If you would like to force the bus tie open, this is where you can do it. So the bus tie is closed in the startup sequence. Usually I turn on, I start the right-hand engine first, and after engine startup, the aircraft will automatically close the bus tie so that you power up both buses of the airplane. That would give the airplane a chance to start up all the avionics. Still, the non-essential bus is load shedded off, so that means that you cannot run the air conditioner on one engine unless you choose the ground cooling mode. We'll come back to that, how that works. But if you would like to open the bus tie, then that's where you do it. So I cannot come up with an example of that, but in the start sequence, after you start up the first engine, and you would like to isolate the two buses, you can use this button for that. The cabin power is a button that you use to shut off the power supply to the cabin. So everything behind the cockpit is hooked onto the switch. So if you have an electric fire or electric smoke developing from the cabin, you would want to push this button immediately to isolate the electrical supply to the cabin. The next button is the ELT button. That's a standard ELT. So it's very simple. Norm again. That means that ELT is just only operating if you crash the airplane. So that's where you want to keep it. You can still test it or reset it if ever it was triggered for some reason. If you trigger it on manually by taking the switch to the on position, then you would need to put it back to test reset and then put it back to normal. You can test these. There are guidelines on how to test the ELTs. I think it's every first 5 minutes on top of the hour or something like that. You are allowed to test the ELT. Then we have the landing gear. They put the nose wheel steering switch along with the landing gear. So this aircraft has hydraulic nose wheel steering, and this is where you operate. So it's really, really easy to maneuver on the ground. I have been used to taxiing other airplanes with no nose wheel steering, and of course that's easy as well. And then when you come into a Honda, it's highly, highly sensitive. You really, really need to be careful when you start taxiing this airplane because it's really sensitive. If you, for some reason, would like to turn off the hydraulic and electronically controlled nose wheel steering, this is where you do it. And the landing gear up and down is self-explanatory. So that's of course where you pull up or down the landing gear. We'll just zoom out again here, and then we can zoom into the master caution panel up here. So this is a panel. You have it in both sides, both the pilot and the co-pilot side. First, we have the display reversion button, and you can push this one if you have a failure on your PFD or MFD. Then you push this button. No, excuse me. If you have a PFD failure, you can push this button. That will reversion all the PFD data into the MFD and shrink it down. So you would still have all your engine data, and you will still have the PFD. But of course, you need to evolve that to see it. So if you have a PFD failure, this is the button you want to use. Hopefully, you will never have to use it. I did experience it one time in real life. Of course, you experience it in the simulator as well, but in real time, I did experience it one time that I had to use the versionary switches that was in the Premiere, but luckily it repaired itself and it came back online in a few seconds. So that was good. Then we have the master alert. So whenever you have a warning or caution firing off, it comes with a CAS message down in the PFD, and then it will fire this blinking switch in front of you. So you can cancel out the blinking, and it actually also have aural warning system, this airplane. So if engine fire, it will say engine fire in your headset to direct your attention to the current problem that you have. You push this button and then you can cut out the flashing lights in front of you, because it's really annoying, especially in flying along in nighttime. If you have a master warning or master caution, you would like to cancel those out. And then we have the chime. The chime, say we have an engine fire, then the system will keep on saying engine fire, engine fire, engine fire until you push that one. So you mute it, but you need to remember to unmute it again after you've dealt with the emergency, because else the aural warning system will be shut off for the rest of the duration of the flight, and you might experience another problem. Then we have the microphone for the cockpit voice recorder. It's up here. Our airplane does not have it. It's serial number 99. It's a legacy model upgraded to APMG, but it does not have the cockpit voice recorder. It's not required by law because we only operate privately with private people in it, so it's not commercial operation. We zoom out again, and then we can zoom into the standby instrument. Again, it's a very nice instrument. In reality, it's one of those things that you hope you will never use. In the event of a dual generator failure and that the batteries run dead, then you can use the standby instrument. But in reality, it's said that the standby instrument will stop being operational before the Garmin G3000 displays. So I don't really know what the logic behind that would be, but anyways, it's here because mostly because it's a legal requirement. You have the airspeed tape and the altitude gauge, and you can toggle between hectopascals and inches of mercury for the baro settings. You also have navigational capability for ILS, VOR, so you can tune that. You would tune it using the CDU still. I forgot to say about the baro knob over here, alert panel as well. So you set in the current QNH and you push it for standard. So when you're flying along on cruise, probably you'll be using flight levels, and so you'll be using 29.92 inches of mercury or 1013.25 hectopascals in your pressure. But all you need to do is to push this one as you climb out through transition altitude. When you descend and you get the current weather information, whether it be a data link, as this aircraft is actually equipped with, we'll come back to that as well, or you receive it via ATIS, you can preset the pressure. And that's really nice, because when you listen to the ATIS, you just preset the pressure, the QNH, and then as you descend through the transition level, all you need to do is to push the button, and then it's actually toggling itself into the QNH from standard setting. So that's really a nice feature as well. The next panel up here is the engine fire panel, and also the registration mark of the aircraft. So our aircraft is Tango 7 Delta November Hotel. So that's of course up here. You can see that when we come out in the real airplane. We have the engine fire switches covered, and then the fire extinguisher. So there is 2 fire extinguishers in this airplane. They are in the engine pylons, and they are extinguishing around the engine. So the bottle is not firing into the engine, it's firing into the pylon to kill eventual fire. So the engine fire switch procedure would be throttle, throttle, button, bottle. So you pull back throttle to verify that you're not dealing with a misindication or a bleed leak somewhere near the engine fire loop. and then if the engine fire still persists, you would go ahead and cut off the fuel to that engine. You also need to verify that it is the right engine that you're actually taking out before you do it, so hurry up slowly about that. After that, you push the engine fire switch. It does a number of things. First, it takes offline the generator, so it isolates the electric circuit so that it cannot have an electric fire out there. Then it cuts off the fuel to the engine, and then it arms the fire bottle. In the Premier, it also cuts off the hydraulic, but in this airplane, the hydraulic system is a little bit different. Getting back to that. After that, you push the fire extinguisher switch, and hopefully the fire should go out. And of course, there's two systems, one for the left and one for the right side. Then we have the autopilot panel. The autopilot panel is not, it is backlit, but there's no color coding on it. You need to see that in the PFD because Honda wants you to know where the switches are, and your muscle memory needs to tell you where to push the different buttons and what they do, and then you look in the PFD as you do this and verify that you get the correct setting that you actually want. So first of all, there's a flight director switch. You can toggle on and off the flight director, and the flight director needs to be on for the autopilot to be operational. And then you have course switch. The course is for choosing the course, inbound, outbound course of the VOR station. So that's basically the only thing that you need to use the course button for. So in reality, you very seldomly touch that button. So the next one is for lateral navigation, different modes that we have. We have nav mode, and that means that it follows whatever nav source you have in there. Most probably it's going to be FMS, but it could also be VOR or whatever you put in there, ADF probably also. Then you have a heading mode selector, and that's of course the aircraft just follows the heading block, and you have the selector down there. So you push it, and then it syncs to the current heading, and then you can adjust the heading on the knob. Then you have approach mode. So when you get cleared approach and your avionics are all set up, you hit approach mode. It can fly approach mode in either ILS or in FMS mode. So you can actually fly totally independent approaches based 100% on GPS, also called area approaches. And then you have the bank button, because when you climb out through a certain altitude, you can half bank is automatically selected. But you can choose half bank before you reach that altitude. That's the button you use it. So the autopilot panel is next. So there you find the toggle switch for the autopilot on and off, and it says quite a funny sound when you toggle it off by accident, so that you are aware that you're actually flying without autopilot. The yaw damper can be turned on and off. When you turn on the autopilot, the yaw damper will automatically turn on as well. So it's only flying, hand flying, and if you need the yaw damper, you can turn it on here. And if you don't need the yaw damper, you can turn it off here. Then we have the cruise speed control that I was talking about before. So if you take the speed selector over here and you say, I want to be flying 160 knots, then you can adjust the throttle so that it gives you approximately 160 knots, and then you hit the cruise speed control, and the aircraft will hold 160 knots. So you cannot see the power levels or the thrust levels are moving because it's solely controlled by the FADEC system. So it's just a computer saying to the FADEC, hey, we need 2% less on this engine, and then it adjusts all the time to keep the speed that you set. Then we have the coupling switch, and that is the switch where you toggle in between if you want it to be the pilot or the co-pilot controlling the autopilot. Then we have the vertical part of the autopilot over here, and that's altitude. So you can put the autopilot in altitude, and then you have the altitude select button here. So you can scroll. The aircraft's capable of flying in flight level 430, so you can go all the way up to 430, but obviously not above that. And you have the VNAV button, so you can put on vertical navigation. So the airplane can actually calculate the descent planning all the way down to minimums, probably even further if you want that. And that's where you control the VNAV. Come back to how that works. The vertical speed mode and the vertical speed wheel down under it. And flight level change. Flight level change is basically the speed that you want to climb or descend with. Then you can choose the speed here. You can use indicated airspeed as well as Mach numbers. So at least in the legacy airplane, this is not really working very well of the autopilot. It's always chasing a speed. So even though you said, let's say I want to climb out with 220 knots, or 240 knots, 210 knots, whatever you want to climb out with, it's really chasing that speed. So I actually prefer to use the vertical speed in this airplane. But in the Premiere, I always use flight level change. A lot more convenient. And then we have the flight director button on the course selector for the co-pilot side. Moving along, we have the co-pilot's master alert. I'll not go through that because it's just the same. And then we have the AFCS servo power system over here. So if we have a trim runaway, this is where we can turn off the trim motors for pitch, roll, and yaw trim. So yeah, if it runs away, you hold it with the red button, and then you can switch it off up here. Of course, when you switch off this, the autopilot will no longer be operable. I'll try to zoom out again here. The cockpit. The PFD for the co-pilot is of course over here, and the MFD, we can zoom in on the MFD. Again, we have soft keys down here. They're not really used on the MFD. You can use them in certain views, but mostly there's actually no use of those. But I guess it's the same display unit that will be used for all. You can see all three displays has these memory card slots over here, and that's how you update the avionics. To update all three cards in one, it's put into the database of the aircraft. Upload your charts, your navigational databases, terrain databases, everything is loaded up in there. You have a band up here which is configurable, so you can customize it the way you want it. In this case, they put ground speed, direct track, estimated elapsed time, and bearing, distance, MSA, ETA up here, UTC time. The engine data is up here. You can see that it's synced. It puts on the engine sync automatically. You don't have to think about it. You can, in the CDU, you can switch it off if you would want that. I don't see any reason to want to switch it off. In the Premiere, it's a manual switch, toggle switch, but in the Honda, it does it itself. You can see the N1 rotation and the N2. You cannot. You can see it down here, just a digital readout, but the N1 is the one you use to set your thrust after. ITT, oil pressure and oil temperature and fuel flow. So fuel flow is of course only for information, but however, if you want to do long range cruise in this airplane, you need to look it up in books, and then you match the fuel flow to what the book says, and you will see that in general you get a little bit better performance than the books, both in high-speed cruise and in long-range cruise. Long range I experienced as good as 20 knots extra in the cruising speed in our airplane. On the high-speed cruise, it's very, very close, within a few knots from the book numbers. The fuel, just summarized over here. I will go through the fuel system in a later video. But up here it has the total amount of fuel, and you can see in each wing tank and then the center tank. The center tank is actually two tanks in our airplane, and in the Elite they added a third tank in the center collection, so it's just added up. And you can see the fuel temperature here. The cabin pressurization system, you can see that the current cabin altitude is 190 feet. The differential pressure is 1.5 psi, and the rate per minute climbing or descending is 0. You can see if the cabin is climbing, it will show maybe 500 feet and then an arrow up in front of it. It can be mistaken to 1500 feet if you don't look properly, and 1500 feet is a lot for a cabin to climb, so you need to be aware that the first digit here is most probably not a digit but an arrow. And then we have the landing field elevation. The yellow dots here indicate that there is no landing field elevation set. Probably it's gonna be magenta, no, not magenta, but purple, like this one up here, and that's when it's set automatically, and it's magenta if you set the landing field elevation manually. The electrical system down here, and you can see again it's two independent systems, so you can see the voltages, they don't necessarily match, they do in this case, but there can be a slight difference on that. And you can see the generator output, so that definitely will not match as yeah, they operate independently, and they power different things, so they will never match. But you can see how much the generator output is. You can see that the speed brake is currently extended, and we have flaps set for landing right now. You can also see that the gear is down and locked. It's all green. It will come up with a yellow warning here if something is not safe. And then you can see the pitch trim all aligned, the roll and the yaw trim as well. And the pitch has a number that you will use when you set up the aircraft for takeoff. That took us through most of the cockpit. We can just take the CDUs here. That's the CDUs and the touchscreens that were not touchscreens as we talked about before. It has three control knobs as well. The middle one is for the pilot's COM1 volume, and you can push if you want to adjust the squelch on the intercom as well. And you can adjust the frequency with the right hand knob, and the left hand knob is used to control the little window on the PFD and the window on the MFD as well. And on the co-pilot's CDU, they are totally connected, and they read everything. So it's like having dual FMS in this case. So it really works. So you, even though you put the flight plan in the left side, it also syncs out the right side and vice versa. So you can really operate two pilots with this aircraft. Then down here we have the alternate gear release lever. It's pulled fully to release. It really goes out far if ever you would need to release the gear manually for some reason. We have the engine start buttons. It's fully automatically, so all you need to do is to push this button for 1 second, then you release it. It lights up green, and it does the engine startup sequence totally automatically. All you need to do is to give it fuel. So when you start up the engines, you just push the button and you give it fuel on the thrust levers. You put it to idle, and then it handles itself. It even shuts off the start sequence if ever you experience a hung start or hot start. So it's really nice. You really don't need too much of the system. It really works well. There's a push to disconnect, and that's if the starter does not disconnect automatically for some reason, you can disconnect it here. Or you need to motor the engine in case of a hot start. You will need to pull out the checklist, and it will direct you to motor the engine with no fuel introduced into the engine. So you'll just leave the thrust levers in cutoff, and then after it's been motored and the temperatures are decreasing again, declining again, you can push this button to disconnect. And then we have the parking brake and the emergency brake. That's the same system, basically, the same brakes. Down here we have the thrust levers. So here we have the two thrust levers. They have a cutoff position, they have an idle position, and they have max continuous thrust position and then takeoff position. The max continuous thrust position is just D10, so you give full power up to MCT, or after takeoff, when you take the thrust back from takeoff thrust, you can just pull it back to the D10. You don't need to monitor it, and then the FADEC system will automatically take the engines back to max continuous thrust. The flaps out here, up, takeoff, / approach, or landing. 3 positions you can set the flaps in, and the speed brake can either be retracted or extended. Our airplane has speed brakes. Most airplanes has that, as it's really a nice feature. It's not a traditional speed brakes that's spoiler controlled, so it's a speed brake in the tail cone that will extend, and it extends according to the airspeed you have. So again, it's automatic. The good thing about it is that you don't feel the typical bump as when you if you take out the speed brakes in the Premier, you can really feel, oh, you're sinking through, because you actually take away the lift with the spoilers, and that's the speed brakes as well in the Premier. I believe that the Citation has the same system, but this one you won't feel that bump. You can hear a little bit of noise, and you can actually use it just to bleed off spare speed on approach. So if you come in hot and high and you need to bleed off some speed, you can use the speed brakes and just keep them out. If you have the right power setting, and you know the after landing in this airplane light around 60%, heavy around 64-65% in one rotation, and you know that it's the correct power setting, but you're just hot and high, you just pull out the speed brakes until you have the right numbers, and then you retract them again, and then you're on speed and you'll stay there. For the ice protection down here, the ice protection system is fully automatic except for the engine anti-ice. So when the system detects ice on the ice detection probes, it will automatically turn on the wing engine anti-ice and the tail anti-ice system. So it's put in norm. You can force it on or force it off as well. You can also force it on and force it off as well for the wing anti-ice system. Wing flow is used if in case of an engine failure, so you have one engine offline, so you can choose to have all the bleed air to heat up the wings from either left or right engine. The engine anti-ice you need to operate manually, and the reason for that it's not automatic is that you still need to use engine anti-ice in visible, moist, and 5C. So if you're in those conditions, you might not the aircraft might not detect ice, but you still need to be able to turn it on in these conditions. So that's why it's made that way. The fuel panel is also very, very easy. So the fuel pumps are norm, and that means that the fuel pumps, the electric ones, only run in the engine startup sequence and when there's low fuel, and if you force them on or you use the cross feed, because that's actually the same system. So you can force them on, force them off. If for some reason the system turns them on and won't be turning them off again, you can force them off. We'll come back to the fuel system in a later video. And then the cross feed here, so you can cross feed left and right engine. So it's only used if you have one engine out. And in reality, the aircraft is designed in a such way that it will always consume fuel from the left and the right wing tank. However, the motive fuel pumps will always be filling up the wing tanks from the center tanks. So even flying single engine, as long as you have fuel in the center tank, you will not be using cross feed system. So it's only if you're running low on fuel, you'll be using this system. The trim system down here is the pitch trim. You can run it in norm or in standby. If you take it out of norm, the autopilot would disconnect. You cannot use the trim barrel on the control wheels anymore. But you can use these two switches down here. You need to operate both at one time to operate the switch in standby mode, the trim in standby mode. I think that's pretty much standard for all aircraft. Then you have the roll and the yaw trim. You can turn off the power to those two trim systems as well down here. And then you have the yaw trim controls down here. The roll trim is also on the barrel on the steering wheel. You have the windscreen heat, the windshield heat over here. It's operated automatically. However, you're able to force turn it off. Recently, there's been some situations with arcing in windscreens. So there was a new modified checklist for that, where you actually turn off the windscreen heat when it's not used, and you turn it off on descent if you need it. So that's where you do that. Pneumatic panel, the cabin inflow valves here, and the engine bleach here. It's two different valves, and I'll come back to that in the pneumatic system overview. On both sides, you have an oxygen mask tested with here. And if you ever need it, you just pull out the mask and then it will automatically turn on the flow of oxygen there. You push some buttons and the harness will expand. You pull it over your head and then release the buttons again. And then the mask will be sitting there. There's some smoke goggles down here under the mask, and they are pretty, they can be a little bit difficult to wear, but they will be an integrated part of your mask, the oxygen mask, so they click on there. But it can be a little bit tricky to take them on. We have the circuit breakers on both sides. We'll come back to that in the electric overview. And then we have the yoke up here. It's a standard yoke, nothing much to say. You have the trim bar up here, so you can trim the aircraft. And then you have the scroll wheel here, push to select. So that's actually for the checklist. So when you're running the electronic checklist, you can check by pushing short push. If you push and hold for more than 2 seconds, it will toggle back to the previous view. So if you're flying along and you have, in this case, we have the TORS view up there, then you push this button for 2 seconds, and then the checklist will appear in the same window. And if you want the TORS view back after you've run your checklist, you just push and hold again. It will toggle in between those two views. You have the master AFCS/trim master, so trim runaway or autopilot disconnect, or autopilot and yaw dampener disconnect, I would rather say. This is where you push. If you use the trim system while the autopilot is on, you will disconnect the autopilot, but the yaw dampener would stay on. You can also disconnect the autopilot alone over here with the autopilot disconnect button, and it will leave the yaw dampener on as well. The system controls button is a button with a shortcut to systems control and the CDUs. So if you are in flight plan on the CDU and you want to control the system, that's where you push, and it just jumps in there. And when you're done in the system control, you push it again and it goes back to your previous view, in this case the flight plan view. And the control wheel steering for the autopilot. So that's pretty much the cockpit as it's constructed and laid out. I